Welcome to Jhart Modelworks. In this installment, we'll be knocking out the chassis and suspension. Welcome to my workbench. Let's get started. These are the kit springs. For the most part, they're pretty good, especially seeing as there's no ejector pin marks in them. But I think we can do better, starting with some measurements. The kit springs are roughly 8mm tall by 4mm wide. This is a 25mm by 4mm spring I scavenged from a ballpoint pen. Always scavenge the springs out of your pens before you throw them away. If you don't have any, or you don't have any that are the right diameter, you can get springs on Amazon dirt cheap. We'll make a mark at roughly 8mm, then cut to the initial length and repeat at the other end of the spring to get two matching springs with flat ends. Now we want to test fit the springs, and if they're too tall, we will cut about half a link at a time and retest until the spring fits securely but with no resistance on the suspension pieces. It may take several tries to get this to fit right. Make sure to cut from the already cut end. Do not cut your flat end. Nope, not quite yet. Try again. Alright, there we go. That's a good fit. We're going to secure the flat end of the springs to an Altoid tin or other flat surface using some double-sided tape, and then we'll give them a couple of coats of Tamiya LP8 Pure Yellow. Once painted, give them plenty of time to dry and handle them gently, as paint does not tend to adhere as well to metal as it does to plastic. Next, we're going to cut some 1/16 inch aluminum tubing to roughly 4mm. This is a tool I picked up that lets me cut multiple pieces of tubing or rod to the exact same length. You really don't need this. I'm just a sucker for nifty tools. You can just measure and try to cut them as equal as you can. There we are, two perfectly matched outer shock bodies. Using our metal file, we want to clean out any burrs that may be on the inside of the ends of the tubing. And now we will cut two pieces of K&S 501 hard piano wire to the length of the springs, as this will fit perfectly inside our tubing. You can use 20 gauge jewelry wire too. It's softer and a lot easier to cut. Just make sure it's straight. Alright, now we slide the wire into our tubing. We'll then put a small dab of glue on the end of the wire, and then we'll push the tubing down flat on a hard surface. And now we have shocks. And now it's time to assemble our front suspension. We're going to start by putting some glue on the flat side of the springs, and then we're going to set them carefully into the chassis, into the circular indents where the springs go. Next, we'll glue in our shocks the same way, and we want to get them in the center of the springs, preferably without them leaning on the springs or touching them. You can hold them up in place or use some CA accelerator to cure them quickly. And finally, we need to put some glue on the four mounting points for the front suspension arms and glue them into place. They did the whole front suspension as one cross-member part. So I tried to break it up a little bit by painting the sway bar yellow to tie in with the springs and the plug wires from the engine, and the steering rack in silver. I think it looks pretty good to me. Critical step here. We can't proceed without some of that. And now we're going to glue the steering box in. Once we get that in place, we're just going to hold it down with a toothpick until it sets. Now we're going to mount the engine, a drop of glue on the cross member under the transmission, and then there's some openings in the engine block where we're going to put our glue so it won't be seen. Then we just press it home. The chassis has 4 locating holes, and we're going to put our glue here. Then the frame should just press into place. The locating holes in the rear are tight and they just snap in. I found the fronts to be not so much, and I needed to add more glue and hold the frame firmly in place till the glue set. Okay, so the rear axle assembly instructions are kind of vague, and it looks like the inner suspension links just glue onto the outside. They don't. They glue inside, and then they slide into these 2 little notches. Then you just glue the rear diff cover in place over them to lock them into place. I also hit the bolts with some silver and a black wash. I've been asked about my glue tool a few times. It's just a pin vise and a sewing needle with the top of the eye removed, and the 2 tines allow you to pick up and place small amounts of glue very accurately. We bent some 22 gauge jewelry wire and glued it to the top of the rear diff for brake lines for a quick and easy bit of detail. I then spent an hour and a half or so carefully bending some more 22 gauge wire into this monstrosity to run a rear brake line from the engine bay to the rear of the car. We're going to carefully wiggle it under the cross member and slide it into place. Then we'll drop a bit of glue between the brake line and the frame rail. We'll add a drop of glue to the front. And then we'll pry the line up at the rear and drop some glue in here as well to make sure everything's secure. That's all neatly in place. Moving on to the exhaust, I painted the pipes in Mr. Color Super Titanium and the mufflers in Super Stainless Steel. I then masked off the mufflers and sprayed some Alclad hot metal sepia in various amounts on the pipes, and then toned the pipes down with some Tamiya flat clear. I'm just going to glue those into the mounting holes on the chassis and make sure the pipes glue into the headers on the engine. We'll handle the tailpipes in final assembly. I wasn't real sure I was going to run a fuel line to the tank. This was a last second addition, or I would have drilled the fuel pump before I glued it into the engine. So I am now gently drilling a 0.3 millimeter hole into the bottom of the fuel pump, being very careful not to break the fuel pump off. I'm going to strip a small bit off the end of some Protect 0.03 braided line and glue the end into the bottom of the fuel pump. It's important to do this off camera where no one can see what you're doing. Next, we're going to put some glue on the frame rail, and then we'll press the line into the frame. We'll glue that in a couple of places. Now we're going to drill another 0.03 millimeter hole into the fuel tank. Then we're going to trim our wire and strip a bit off and glue the end in place. I cut this a little shorter than I wanted to, but it was still long enough to fit. We're in the home stretch, time to put in the rear suspension. The way the drive shaft is made, I think we can just set this in without any glue. I'm going to slide one end of the drive shaft into the engine. We'll slide the rear diff over the other end of the drive shaft and then just glue the rear diff into place. Now we're going to glue in the outer suspension arms and sway bar. This is a pretty nice 4-link suspension. And our drive shaft still spins. This is one of those little details that only we'll ever know about. And last but not least, we have the rear shocks. The locating pins on the shocks where they connect to the suspension arms are pretty small, and it's kind of hard to see, so to try and see what I was doing, I ended up pulling it out of frame again. And there we have it. The suspension is all wrapped up. Everything's looking really clean. Our brake and fuel lines are nicely done. I think it's a good touch. And this kit is going together really well in my opinion. I am still working on the body. It's getting closer, but there's still some delays. So from here, I think we should be moving on to the interior for the next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. Also, feel free to leave comments, feedback, critique, or anything else in the comment section below. I enjoy interacting with all my viewers in the comment section and try to reply to all the comments I receive. If you want to catch future videos, please consider subscribing to my channel and make sure you click the bell notification icon so you can be notified when I upload new videos. As always, thank you for watching, keep modeling, and have a great day.